it's such a different time, right? Like everything is being redesigned, recreated.
Mhm.
And in some ways that's, I think, really, really positive, right? Because there's so much opportunity
Yeah.
as everything's shifting around, but there's
Yeah.
also just the, um, it's like trauma, right? There's always this trauma of like, wait, I had all these things rolling and now they're not going to happen.
Yeah.
Like what's going on? So I completely acknowledge how difficult that is for everybody.
Yeah.
You know, you're doing a really cool thing with this podcast and the continued conversations,
Yeah.
because I mean, that's kind of where the art and creativity lives right
Yeah.
now. So it's pretty hip what you're doing, man.
Yeah, well, we started talking. I want to welcome you. This is Let's Talk Off the Podium. Brian
Oh,
Chin is with me. Welcome to the podcast.
thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, you're leading a major music department in a major university. What has that been like? What did the university do? What did the department do right after everything happened?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I mean, it's like everything else in the arts, it's changing all the time, right? We're trying to figure out how to move forward with every little thing. Like the call I was on this morning was with the dean, trying to figure out how we deal with the courses and the spaces that we have.
Yeah.
Are we going to be, fully online? Are we going to try some hybrid thing? So we're exploring all the options right now and trying to figure out how to make those things work. And it's a challenge because things are still up in the air. And we want to do everything that we can do to be safe and good by our faculty and our students. But on the other side, we want to make music. We want to be together, and we want to move forward. And I think there are very real needs to do that, to keep the program inertia, but also to keep the students enrolled and participating. So those are huge challenges.
Wow.
If I were to pick the number one challenge, though, it would be around community and
Yeah.
around engagement.
Yeah.
This is the kind of thing that music departments just do naturally and beautifully. But in this time, it's a whole nother level of how do we engage each other? How do we um, um, how do we build connection,
Yeah.
which is what musicians do
Yeah.
when we're all apart and online. And these kind of asynchronous classes that we're essentially creating don't necessarily treat they're not really very good for building relationships, let's put it that way. So
it's tough.
those are the primary challenges. Yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't stay that way, because it is tough for the music world to deal with that. I don't know, maybe one day it'll be a world where, I don't know, 100 years from now, where technology will be at such a level where, you could make music and still feel that connection. I don't know. I know it's a very weird way to think about it, but for some reason, I feel like maybe one day there'll be something where, even though it is through a computer or some kind of a device, but you'll feel connected to that person more than what we feel now. Because our connection now is, I see you, as I hear you, but maybe it'll be some kind of a magical thing where it'll be even more of a feeling of being next to each other. I don't know. Maybe it won't ever exist. I'm not sure, but
well, it also could be that the human thing will shift a little bit too, and like we have a more of an ability and an openness to be able to be receptive to being able to connect with people in these new platforms, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think people are trying. One of the things I did with my trumpet studio that I thought was kind of fun. I created like almost like a workout routine kind of thing, where it was a 10-week program. It's a 10-week quarter. Each week there was it wasn't musical necessarily, but it was for trumpet players. We were doing, it would go through and kind of cycle through the different keys. It would cycle through different techniques and exercises and whatnot that are very particular to the trumpet. And I would put together this routine. It was maybe 30 minutes long or so. I'd send it out at the beginning of the week, and students would play that all week. At some point they would record it. And then on Thursday we would get together and we'd play it together. Now what that meant was everyone had to be on mute except for me, and I would play it, but then they would be playing with me.
Oh, yeah.
So to me, it felt like isolating and scary, because I'm like playing my trumpet to myself, but yet everyone's playing with me. So I'm like, oh, oops, mess that up, right? And so, but I think what I was kind of told in feedback is that was an opportunity to feel like you're actually playing with others, even though you really weren't.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a I don't know, an attempt at that. But yeah, I hope at some point you're right. The technology has zero latency and we can just do this. That'd be really fun.
Yeah. Well, based on, I follow you on social media, so I know that you have a family and you're busy with all these projects. One thing that I like to know from artists is how they balance these things. You have, and we'll talk about it. You're an executive director of the Common Tone Arts.
Yeah.
And you're leading a music department. You're active playing and composing, but you also have a family. How do you balance these things, and what are some tips maybe for musicians who are trying to balance all these things?
Don't do it. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, your question is really, really great. And actually, I work on this all the time, and it's not by accident, right? One of the, in fact, I have, I think one of the things that is important for musicians and artists to really focus on here is the ability to kind of compartmentalize different projects. And I have a deep kind of belief, and having watched this with my students and clients and everybody progress, this idea that the project-based career is really, or the projects that we have essentially culminate into our career, right? So these projects, one at a time, actually are our career, right? So if I'm going to produce this show, I'm going to write the music, I'm going to pull these people together, I'm going to do this thing, yes, that's one project, but if you put it all together, it just becomes part of what we are, right? And so I find that separation alone helps manage those things, because then it just becomes a series of projects. My work at the university, for example, I have maybe 3-4 large projects from which just about everything falls under, and then it just becomes basic project management. And the key to project management is being able to break stuff up into action steps.
Yeah.
Like step 1, step 2, step 3. And then the hard part, of course, is prioritizing those things and keeping them all in front of you. I think one of the biggest challenges is patience with managing a lot of different projects, because these are all long-term projects.
Yeah.
And I think once you start to see them as longer-term projects, I mean, yes, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end point of these things, but the span can be years or months. Sometimes it's weeks, but we musicians get very much into like, okay, I'm going to prepare for this audition or this recital, right? And there's like maybe a 6-week window or something. But then starting to say, I'm going to build a nonprofit. Okay, I committed to a decade right there.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, that's just what that is. I'm running a music school. I want to innovate the curriculum. You innovate curriculum, that's a 3 to 5 year minimum commitment. And so, from inception to brainstorming to catalog change to enrolling into first student, right? It's like that period is 3 years. You need another couple of years to actually demonstrate it. So keeping, I think, the long term in mind, that expectation, I think, is the hardest part of managing all those things, right? Being able to switch between one and the other requires this idea that we have, like, that I'm working towards something. Otherwise we forget about that and we just start to feel victims of our own creation. Yes, takes one to know one, right? That's exactly what tends to happen, until you step back and go, wait, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And without that why, we spiral.
Yeah. Well, go for it. Did you have?
Oh, no, I was going to say, one of the things I do though is, and I was using this analogy with other people just a little bit ago. I love to think about it like a farmer, right? And like if you're a farmer and you there's windows for things, right? There's a time to prepare the soil. There's a time to put the seed in, and then you wait. And sometimes there's not much to do, and that's okay, right? You come back and you check on things, you do a little weeding, but for the most part, you have to wait for it to grow.
Yeah.
And then you have this moment where you have the harvest, and you have to do it right then, right? And it's like there's an urgency around that.
Yeah.
Um, but these things are planned out, and there's a patience involved. And then, for the farmer, I mean, yes, it's like you're anxious to see what the fruit of your work is going to be, but it's kind of beyond your control too. So I love that analogy, because it keeps things positive and
Yeah.
helps me feel like less of like before, like a little bit less of a victim
Yeah.
to my own creations.
Yeah.
So
I want to talk a little bit about a recent post you made on Facebook, and that'll lead us into your other project. And you just recently built. You called it the Mountain Studio, I think.
oh yeah.
So tell me about that, because
Yeah.
also you credited some friends for helping you out with it, but you also credited YouTube for helping you with it.
That's right. So my parents live in Moscow, Idaho. That's where I grew up. And they have 10 acres up in the mountain up there. And about 6 years ago, I started this project with my father, because it's one of those things. I realized I had left home at 18 to go play trumpet, and I'm all doing my thing, and I never at that point didn't like have much to connect back to with my parents, with my father. So as I'm approaching 40, I'm like, okay, well, let's maybe find something to do. So I decided that building a little retreat place for myself, and like an artistic retreat kind of place, would be an ideal thing. I work a lot, and I would hate to be that father that on my time off goes and disappears into the mountains somewhere. So by doing it on my parents' place, then I get to see them, I get to see my kids, they get to run around, and I get to work. And to do a little bit of both. So it's kind of an ideal scenario. And then the project was really doing a little bit each summer with my father, and I did the designs and did everything ourselves. We only hired out for one or two little things.
Wow.
But it was a great learning opportunity. I didn't know much about construction. My father had built a house, but a long time ago. And yeah, so 1,000 YouTube videos later. I mean, it turns out there's nothing that's hard in any of those steps.
Yeah.
And maybe the analogy here is beautiful in music too, right? There's like nothing hard. Like, okay, you learn your major scales and you learn this pattern, like, right? And but you combine all these things, there's like a lot to know. But any little step is really not that hard. First time in takes twice as long, and of course everything I was doing was first time and the only time. So there's that. If I were to do it again, I would know what I would hire out, let me put it that way. But yeah, having this studio out there has been beautiful, because you get to compose out there. I get to record out there. We are doing a chamber music festival out in Moscow, and that becomes kind of the home base. The Torch Collective gets to go out there and do a retreat and do some workshop of new music. We're doing a new music workshop that was planned for June out there, but we're going to have to wait until next year, of course. So it's become a beautiful place to be able to work and kind of use as a home base for a lot of projects.
Yeah. Well, the Torch project, the ensemble, is very interesting instrumentation. How did you come to put that project together with the instruments that I don't think I've ever seen that set, or maybe I have. I can't remember.
No, I don't think there's anything. I mean, if you look, so Torch started as a quartet. And Torch, the instrumentation for Torch, the quartet, is clarinet, or I should say clarinets, trumpets, string bass, and percussion, vibraphone mostly. And yeah, that's kind of rare. But if you look, there's one of each from the musical families, right? And so that was kind of by design to have those things. And then depending on how you put those things together, you get very different textures, right? You kind of have the wood group with the metal group, and then you can kind of do the wind group with the rhythm section type group. So depending on how you structure those things, you have lots of options that are pretty fun. So we have tons of color in front of us, tons of tons of potential there. But the real way that group came together was less around instrumentation and more around who's got the classical chops to be able to pull off kind of high level chamber music, but also the improvisation and the jazz background to be able to pull from that kind of bebop tradition too of improvisation and community playing. So we were really looking at that from that paradigm first, and then we kind of realized, whoa, this is really cool. We have one of each, so that's how that group came together. Yeah. And now it's expanding. So much of what we had been kind of commissioning and collaborating with used kind of that quartet plus. And so we're just like, you know what, let's just call it what it is. And we're calling it now the Torch Collective. And there's the string quartet, like Skyro string quartets in there. Okay. So now you put a string quartet here with the Torch quartet here, and you have some really cool things, because now your bass player can make a quintet option here. You have winds plus, then you have percussion. And so there's a lot of fun stuff you can do. And then we're adding a dancer, a couple of visual artists, and so it becomes a true like artistic generation group. Wow. Which is what we want to try to do.
And Ben Thomas, he plays bandoneon in that group as well, right?
Yeah
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I wanted to know a little bit about your inspiration. I mean, what let you do the trumpet, and who maybe some trumpet players or some musicians who really inspired you early on to even pursue a career in music?
It's kind of a cool question. I'm stumbling because I can't remember the exact moment where I was like, that's what I want in terms of the trumpet. But I will say I grew up in a non-musical family. So when I first started playing in the junior high band, and I had my trumpet, and I had the trumpet at home for a couple of years before that. So clearly I was attracted to it. My dad bought it for me at the pawn shop. And but once I started playing in that band, something clicked, and I was all in from the very beginning. And I couldn't even really tell you why. It was just like, to me, it was like the coolest thing. And it has something to do with the vibration. It has something to do with the community. There was an early experience in my 7th grade year. I was able to make it into the 9th grade band in my 7th grade year, because I actually accidentally did what they told me to do. And they said, practice a half hour every single day. I said, okay. I actually did it. I don't think any of the other kids ever do that, but I don't know. I didn't get the message. So I actually practiced. I did it. And like all of a sudden I was like, I could actually play. And I thought everyone else was practicing that way too. But I was in the 9th grade band. We commissioned a piece by this composer, Daniel Buckfitch, who remains a mentor of mine to this day at the University of Idaho. And he was, get this, man, he was doing his master's degree. And for part of his master's degree, he was writing a piece for junior high band for his like composition. It's like awesome. So he comes in there and he starts working with us for this month or so while he's writing this piece. And it's this piece called Dinosaurs, and it's got all these things that kids love, like these stomping things, and it was just a ton of fun. And it was that process in retrospect that has me doing what I'm doing today. Right? I felt like we were doing something that was it was really fun. It was really important work. Like, we're bringing something to life, right? We all were fully invested in this. There was a very excited audience around that too. There was like a buzz around it. And I had, from early on, this kind of visceral experience around creating new music. And I think, as far to go back and think about it, I think 100% this is why I do what I do. As an educator, it's about building, I call it my army, my co-conspirators here, right? That are like, they're not just like I've long been saying things like, I don't think music schools should be training robots, right? Like, our conservatories tend to do that. Not obviously not on purpose, but this is kind of what tends to happen. We have these interchangeable pieces. I'm going to learn how to do this, great, and I can go sit in the orchestra and just sit in, right? But rather finding people who use this platform to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
How do we use this to create something? How do we use this to build that community and to create that buzz and you know, help heal the brokenness and bring people together, which is really what music can do. Hence the name Common Tone Arts, right? So everything I do as an educator, as a musician, as an administrator, I suppose, trying to make these things happen, comes down to that experience in junior high where, you know, this is why we do what we do.
Yeah.
And maybe that helps answer the question you asked first, like, how do you do all those things, and like, why? And that's the reason, right? It's an oblique strategy to get to that point of, you know, how do we create as much positivity through our art form as possible. I can't do it myself, so I'm going to bring a lot of people with me, and we're going to try to like, you know, continue honing in on that.
Yeah. A little bit about your outside of music things. You said that you had the summer project with your dad, and you got to work on something together. But is there something that most people that know you don't know about that you're willing to share on the podcast? Whether it's a hobby, a passion,
like completely outside of music. Yeah, man. I just, I don't know. I love learning. I love creating in all different ways. So our family loves to cook. And somehow our kids picked up on this too along the way. Just, we love to create things. And like, I really feel stifled by the recipes. So it's like, in many ways, it's like jazz music, really, right? You have a really strong vocabulary, and then you put things together, right? And you can kind of improvise and make things work. So I love doing those things. I love building things. I think when it really comes down to it, I'm a builder. You know, hence the nonprofit. That what we're doing at the university is very much building a program. And as long as I'm building, I'm happy.
Well,
so
I want to go to another thing, which you said, and I think it's fantastic. I think it was in an interview, maybe with Seattle Times. I can't remember where I read it, but you said, I'm a 21st century musician, which means I have many jobs, some of them even paid. And I think that's fantastic. And that's something to think about for young musicians too, because sometimes you might take on jobs, or musicians might take on jobs, artists that don't pay, but they're really something that they're so passionate about. And other times you might be offered something that actually pays, and you're like, actually, I don't want to do that. What's that balance? How do you approach that? And maybe some more the depth into what you said with that quote. And I know it's probably just a quote from a longer conversation.
Well, I mean, it has really significant ramifications, though, because I mean, part of what's difficult in the arts is we have to eat too, right? One of the reasons that I think it's best to think of yourself as a 21st century musician that does a lot of things is because some of those you're going to be emotionally connected to, and like, this is what I really want to be doing, and some of them are paying the bills. But if we do this with the right mentality, we can bring those things together in such a way that works towards the same purpose, right? For example, when I first started, I mean, I've always been teaching, but for a while it was like, this is what I had to do to be able to pay the rent this month, right? I'm going to take some trumpet students and I'm going to do it. And yes, practically that's true. But as I started to shift my mentality a little bit, right? Like, I think of myself more as a mentor. I'm going to try to be the inspirational person that I've had in my teachers, to say, you know, like, this is not just about learning to play the trumpet real good. This is about learning how to, like, become an artist and a musician and a fully capable human being. Whether or not you have a trumpet in your hand or not, it doesn't really matter, right? It's like the trumpet is a tool or means to an end. And yes, it's there, but the trumpet's going to challenge your perseverance. It's going to, you know, reveal the places where we have mental hangups on things. And so whether or not that you actually continue playing the trumpet or not doesn't even matter to me, because it's a tool to talk with the person.
Yeah.
You know, and I won't say it's like therapy, but it's like, it becomes kind of like therapy. It's like on a one-on-one situation, it's like 90% of it's just like becoming a better human being, through the practice and through the study. And like, so now everything I'm doing, every time I'm sending an email, for the university, it's like most of what I do at the university is administration stuff. And as I'm doing that, it's like, I have to keep the memory, or the remembering why I'm doing that. So that, I can remember that this is part of being an engaged musician and the best human being I can be. Of serving others, and of being able to build the systems that can support and give voice to others. And I mean, I think that's kind of what it means to be a 21st century musician. I do think that in one sense, I'm extremely lucky, because I realized early that I didn't want to just freelance to like, or to just like get a job in the orchestra. For a while I was on the audition trail, and I realized that wasn't necessarily what I wanted. I needed to create. So now I have the fortune of being able to be at the university, where I see that as being a subsidized artist.
Yeah.
Right. And now I can afford to lose money on these projects, right? Because I don't have to demonstrate their commercial value.
Yeah.
I can just do these projects. But it's like, if you think about it, all of us can do that.
Yeah.
Right. So I have a studio of 60 violinists or something. Like, you're a subsidized artist.
Yeah.
Or you're building your army of conspirators to come with you as you build it. Right. So I think that most of that's mindset, kind of away from this like victimized thinking into like leadership thinking.
Yeah.
And so all of that to say, I mean, I do think that the 21st century musician is, the truly active 21st century musician is not responsive in the way that we had been in the past. In other words, I wait for that phone to call, but rather we're forward thinking. Yeah. And waiting, or not waiting for that phone call, but rather designing projects that can bring my career forward. To go back to something you said a second ago, you talk about how difficult teaching is. Yeah. And how you're working oftentimes with students who are not going to go on and become professional musicians, and all of that, like, that's part of our mission, right? Is like bring these, help these people become the best people they can. This is the reason that through Common Tone Arts, like we're doing this Institute for Creativity. Yeah. This is the thing I care most about, because what it's really able to do is serve all of these students. If you think about it, arts programs in college and beyond, go to get your master's in performance or something, or in visual art and whatnot, it's all very expensive. Yeah. Yeah. First of all, it's the systems are designed to weed out people. That's we have an audition. The first thing you do is you go in there on an audition, and you're standing there with your oboe and 100 other oboists, and there's 2 slots. Yeah. I mean, that's just like scarcity mindset at its core. And that those conservatories in our music schools become these gatekeepers. Yeah. Of whether or not you have done enough practice, which is in itself a kind of a privilege thing and an exclusatory. Does that person own the instrument? Yeah. Right? Like, oboes aren't cheap. They're like, yeah. To get a good instrument that you can compete on, and access to private lessons and great teachers. Yeah. The best teachers in any city are very expensive, and good Lord. And I don't know, there's all these 1,000 barriers in access. Yeah. To these programs that, to me, don't do the world any good. Yeah. If I'm a doctor, or if let's say I'm a violinist in the youth symphony, like you mentioned, a lot of this happens all the time, right? Where they study, they practice, they're playing great, and then they go to college, they go become doctors and lawyers and whatever, and then they stop playing. Yeah. Or if they do, it's kind of in a hobby-like way, and kind of in a passive-like way. Yeah. What the Institute for Creativity is hoping to do is be able to provide resources for lifelong growth and support and creativity for these people to keep growing as artists. Yeah. right? You're more than just a peg in the wheel of the violinist, right?
Yeah.
You actually have something to say. And our current systems don't message that it's okay to say it,
Yeah.
or that you didn't go to art school, you didn't major in music, or you didn't go to conservatory or something, or your conservatory isn't as good as this conservatory, right? Which is something we get a lot in the music world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm trying to just, my mission really has become, I want to debunk that whole thing. In not just music, but in the visual arts and the dance world. We see this everywhere, and to find ways here that we can get people to feel empowered to create and to keep growing.
Yeah. You said a lot of good things that I've been thinking about, especially when it comes to practicing or to even have access to have the finances, because classical music, especially maybe more than any other genre, is finances and have a big impact on your career as well, because some of these festivals are very expensive, as you mentioned. Private lessons with top teachers are very expensive as well. So and also, if you come from a low income family, you might have to have a job when you're 16 or something, or 15, and you don't have the 4 hours a day to practice because you're
That's
just
right.
working part-time. So it's it's tough, and it's great that you're doing this work, because I think it's very inspirational. Hopefully it'll inspire others to do similar type of work, and I'm sure there are many other people who do this. I wanted to know about your journey to Seattle, because Idaho, and then you went to East Coast. Why Seattle?
So I did grow up in Idaho. I had great resources at the University of Idaho. There's that jazz festival out there, Lionel Hampton Festival. Once a year, all these people come to town. Dizzy Gillespie's here, and I was like, wow! And it was like I lived for that week. But there's 51 other weeks, right? I was like, oh man! And so that I wanted to leave. So let's see, I went to New York, was out there for 6-7 years or so, did finish my undergrad, stayed for a master's, started working out in the area. I took my first audition as a practice run while I was in my master's degree, and then won it. And that was for the Tacoma Symphony out here. And so at, what was I, 23 or something, I said, well, I can either stay out here in New York and keep battling, or I can come out here and start battling out here. But with a job, the Tacoma Symphony, it was completely different. So we made that move. My wife and I were thinking, my wife now, and at the time we're thinking, well, we'll probably be here for 2-3 years and then move on or something. But we moved directly to Seattle. I started working in the scene, and time kind of went by, and we're like, why would we go anywhere else? This place is amazing. And so I stopped looking for work anywhere that wasn't somewhere better than Seattle, which is like very, or equal, somewhere where I want to live is basically where it was, so I just started doing that. But then as things started moving forward, I started realizing that it didn't matter where it was. Right. It's because you can build the things I'm doing, you can do anywhere. And so I'm excited about that at this point. So raising kids in Seattle is a beautiful place. And that's how we ended up here.
Wow.
And now I've been 20 years. We just celebrated.
Wow.
Good Lord.
Good
Lord.
I mean, I guess a question I've been asking my guests, it's been a constant the past like 50 episodes or something, is the life-changing moment. So many things that you said I might consider life-changing, but are there personal and professional, maybe one of each life-changing moment, or a couple of each that you want to share that really changed your life, both professionally and personally?
Oh yeah, man. Every day, really. I mean, there's so many, right? But some of them that, if I were to go back and look at those trajectory changes, one of them was when I first got to New York. I had, grew up in Idaho. I, for whatever reason, we didn't come to Seattle very often. We'd go to other places, but even as we travel around, I never really wasn't, with a non-music family, I never really was exposed to really high-end music making,
Uh-huh.
other than that jazz festival, which is kind of a big jam session. So getting to New York kind of blew my mind. I remember sitting for the very first time in the New York Philharmonic. We used to do that thing where you stub in, right? I don't know if you know, I probably shouldn't say that on a podcast, but the people in the first, in the, like the main floor would oftentimes leave after the concerto at the intermission, and then the students would stand outside and say, "Hey, can I have your ticket?" And so they'd hand you your ticket, you go in and you sit in, and then you watch the Mahler or whatever it is on the second half. So I saw so many concerts, but that first one, they were doing Strike 5, and I had never ever heard a sound like that.
Wow.
And I will never forget it, because I was sitting dead center in that strings, the New York Philharmonic string section. I'm like, and I had never heard that level of intensity before, and all the things. And that shook me to the core. And before that, I was a jazz guy. I never did any classical music. Almost at the exact same time, another defining experience. We did an audition at the school for Mahler's Fifth.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the big trumpet solos and all these things. I didn't know. I'm a jazz guy from Idaho. I didn't care. And my teacher made me do it. And like, I didn't know. So, but I went in there, I did on my B flat trumpet, it was like with my jazz setup, and somehow, but it was a screened audition. Somehow I won the audition. I don't know how that happened. But I was completely green, had no business playing that orchestra. So they put me on third. Even then, like, I still had no business being in that orchestra. But again, that was another one of those moments where it's like, holy crap.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is what, okay, I get it. Right. And up to that point, it was like classical music was dead white guys, and I didn't give a shit, and I was angry. Right. But at that point, like, I understood it finally. And, to bleed into other conversations for a second. I mean, this is one of the things, I hear that phrase a lot from our students with a little bit of smugness, right? Like this, like, oh, I don't care about these dead white guys anymore. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I understand that, right? But the music and the art is, until you really get in there and experience it and know what that is, like, I'm trying to encourage them to not just shut the door on this, because I was that same kid. I really, my teachers made me do these things. I was like, all right. And then I was like, holy crap.
Yeah.
I didn't get it until, like, all of a sudden you get it. And then you can't even really describe what that is. But I don't know. Those experiences were truly, truly defining.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, you like jazz, you played jazz a lot when you were younger, and then classical. But now, what do you listen to, especially the past 3 or 4 months? What do you listen to now?
That's an awesome question. I find I listen way less than I used to.
Okay.
It used to be the kind of thing, like, I'd walk around headphones, I had it everywhere, right? And back in the day, there was Spotify. It didn't exist. YouTube didn't exist. You had like one CD,
Mm-hmm.
right? You put that on and you just wear that out. And I listened way different as a student and as a young musician than I do now. I listen with curiosity now, I think, and a little more intentionally. So this last month of June was my contemporary opera month. And I challenged myself to try to listen to a new contemporary opera every day for that month, as a way to build vocabulary. I'm working on an opera right now.
Okay.
And I kind of wanted a better context of how people are using voices currently. And so that was kind of an academic study into that. If I'm like just cooking something or whatever, honestly, it's like whatever the kids put on or whatever Spotify's playing. And it's like completely changing the way I listen, right? Because I oftentimes have no idea what's playing, right? But I just love music. So part of it's like, what's this lo-fi beats thing about? Like, I've listened to a lot of that lately. Do you know much about that?
No.
It's crazy, man. It's like all quarter tone stuff.
Wow.
It's gorgeous. They call it lo-fi beats.
Interesting.
So it's like this hip hop tradition, but it's combining that with electronica a little bit, and it's all quarter tones. And just listening to a bunch of that, trying to get my head around that. And because it sounds so weird at first, and you're like, oh, that's cool. But you're like, what is that? And so I had to go digging on that a little bit. So I kind of have a musical curious mind, and I love checking those things out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have favorites, and I always go back to those.
Yeah. We
Listen to
didn't.
Coltrane the other day.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh man, when in doubt, I go back to Coltrane. Yeah.
Well, we didn't get much to, you compose, you do so many projects, as we mentioned. We didn't talk about composition much. Maybe we'll get to it in another podcast. I do have a few more questions before I know you're busy. You have a couple other podcasts and other things coming up after. But,
it's busy days.
Seattle, since you
Yeah.
lived here for about 20 years, what's your spot in Seattle? Like, where is one place you go, you're like, this is like my favorite spot, or just I relax here, or something? Is there a hidden gem that you're willing to share? So those who are not from Seattle, when they come here, they go to that spot.
I mean, Seattle's so cool that way, right? There's all these beautiful places. Discovery Park is gorgeous. Yeah. I live right above Gasworks Park. Just going down there and looking at the city, you go, damn, that's a beautiful city.
Yeah.
We're so lucky. And I see it all the time, but we forget, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's seeing the mountain, Tahoma, like Rainier. We need to change the name of that, by the way.
Yeah.
But you see that mountain, it's just like on a day like today, it's just like a bluebird day. It's just, there's nothing like that thing. And just kind of has a spiritual sense about it.
Yeah.
So for me, it's about the ocean. It's about that mountain. And just really a really cool place to live.
Yeah.
Whenever you fly in, you know what I mean? Like you look down, you're like, damn, look at that place. It's like surrounded by mountains. There's like water everywhere. There's like these little islands, and you're like, I don't even see the city. And then you're like, oh, there it is. This little thing. And you're like, that's so lucky.
Yeah.
Beautiful place. And then you get stuck in traffic and you forget. But
that's awesome.
But it's like, it's just the city everywhere.
Yeah.
I bike commute most days. Walking or biking most days. And so, but there's something about that Fremont Bridge over there. I like that it feels artistic. It's a very artistic bridge.
Yeah.
And but there's something about it, the design or whatever. Maybe it's just that there's trees and water all around, but it feels like integrated.
Yeah.
So to me, as I cross that, I have this thought of like, this is maybe the best idea of how we humans and artists can integrate with the nature around us in the city, because it's got a huge purposeful role, but it's also gorgeous.
Yeah.
And it's like, I had this, I have that little bit of like sense of like wonder as I go by there. It's like, how can we make that even better? So I just love walking that bridge.
Last question, and I know you said so many things that if young musicians are listening, they'll take it as advice and apply it to their career, or at least be inspired by everything you've done in your career. What advice would you give to young musicians, especially in COVID, and also even without COVID, it's already a tough career path. What advice would you give them?
It's funny. I ask this question all the time to people, and I'm like, what would I say?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I mean, you mentioned, my career and whatnot. It's funny because that triggers me a little bit. I actually don't think my career's started yet. Or it's like, it's like, I guess I'm challenging myself here too. Like in my mind, a career is like, my father was a doctor, right? Like you become a doctor, now your career starts, right? As a musician, I never felt like my career started. It's just like this combination of all these projects.
Yeah.
And like when I step back and think about that, and I go, okay, that's actually true, right? Then I'm okay with the fact that I don't feel like my career's really started. It's like, I'm not comfortable. I'm not like in the groove. I'm just getting going, man. It's like, I have so many things I want to do still. I think that the advice that I would give to others would be along that line of trying to figure out how to adopt that mindset as early as possible. Of your role as musician is to lead in society, right? It's to create. It's not to sit around and wait for gigs, which is, I mean, yeah, we gotta eat, right? But like but that's not our role, right? Our role is that's part of our role, in helping other people's projects come to fruition. But it's like, create your projects. Let's go build something, go create something, challenge yourself a little bit. And that's going to look completely different for every single person. And I think it should. That's the beauty of that diversity of thought, right?
Yeah.
Your podcast is awesome, right? And like, you just went out there and did it. And that's one small thing of what you do.
Yeah.
I mean, you have so many things that you do. That's one small thing. And it's like, we can all just start moving forward with these, whatever that is for us, right? I've chose to manifest it in certain ways. Yeah. And my advice to the young students would be able to do that same thing. One of the things I say to the students at the university a lot is the idea of the way talent works, right? Like, so we have, if you could think about it, like, you have, this is like this is like the model of like the breadth of all that you can know in music, right? And there's like all these different genres, or all these different things, and we need a lot of experiences, across the board. But you also need to be really, really deep in one thing. They call it the T-graph model, right? So it's like, you're really deep, because it's through that depth of talent building that you have the ability to get to all these other places over here. And
that's awesome. I love that. That's a great way of explaining. I've never heard anyone say it that
really
way. Right.
And so it's like, the biggest mistake I see students make is doing one of the two things, right? They either don't go wide enough, and they go, I'm only going to learn Beethoven, or I'm only going to do, you see, actually, frankly, you see it more in the jazz people. They're like, I'm only going to do this, right? And then they shut everything else out. Currently at the studio, we tend to see people very into pop music, and that's great. But then they're like, that's all there is. And I don't know. I would say, hey, students, like, keep an open mind your entire life, right? We're all learners, and like, anytime you hear something, you're like, oh, that's cool, go figure it out, right? That's how I started doing flamenco music. Like, I didn't plan to do flamenco music. I was like, oh, that's cool. And I just kept doing it. So it's like really, really wide. And then that instrument, it's like figuring out what instrument you're playing or whatever it is, that craft that comes from that craft has to go really, really deep. And there's your tools, right? You have craft, you have the exposure up here. Those are your tools, and the intersection between the creativity and the craft is where the art comes from. Oh. So that's what I would encourage the young folks to be thinking about.
That's awesome. Thanks, Brian. Anything else you want to add before we end?
Oh my gosh, I could talk with you all day.
Well, thank you so much. That's it's been great having you. Brian Chin was my guest. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you, man.
Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Off the Podium. If you enjoyed this episode, please comment, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next episode.